afternoon. Welcome to EduSet Network. Friend, as you know, we have organized a series of lectures on international relation. We are trying to know how the dynamics of the world changing, and we try to understand the India's interest in the relation of changing situations. In the last few lectures, we have come to know about the India relation with neighboring countries, Asian countries, and also Indo-US relations. We will move further and we will try to understand the prevailing situation in Latin America and Europe, and we will see how India can protect its interest in the relation of a changing situation that offers challenges and opportunity for us. And for discussion on this very topic, we have in a studio Dr. Aparajita Kashyap. She teaches political science and have a special interest in international relations and particularly Latin America. So on behalf, I welcome Dr. Kashyap for EduSet lecture on this very topic. Welcome, ma'am.
Very good morning to everybody. Today's topic is Dynamics of the Changing World and India, and this is part 3 of the series. So I would only be covering Latin America and Europe because United States and South Asia have already been covered. Now, if we look at the changing dynamism throughout the world, one perception that has emerged is that India is emerging as a global leader, both politically and economically. And because of this changed situation in which India has become important, there is a major challenge and opportunity that India has, and how to utilize the challenges, how to overcome the challenges, and how to utilize the opportunities is very important, and it will see India emerging as a major global power in the coming years. So to begin with, we start with the foreign policy challenges. So there were traditional challenges of foreign policy, but then there are certain new issues on the anvil, and I would like to point out that some of the new issues are environment, of course, and climate change is very important. Then the other challenge is terrorism, the civil nuclear cooperation, regional groupings and regroupings. So much so that the entire paradigm has changed. There is a shift in policy, there is a shift in thinking, and all this because there is another factor which is very important, and that is globalization. Globalization has changed the world politics entirely. What was very important in the national territorial border, or what was important for India's sovereignty, now becomes very important because we are not living in a localized world. Now it is a globalized world. So the question of sovereignty is being challenged every now and then. And then of course we cannot ignore China, which is an important neighbor of India, and the kind of challenge that it keeps posing, and we are always thinking how to counter China. Why is China important? How can we counter China? And so China is an important challenge in the foreign policy making of India. Then the other challenge is that economically India is growing. Every day we see that India is now an economic power, middle economic power. But just having economic growth is not enough. How to sustain the economic growth, that is another challenge. And then there are internal challenges which become externalized, and these are the problems of Kashmir and Northeast. So every thinking on the global world, on global world fora, the questions of Northeast and Kashmir, more often than not, they just spring up, and this is another challenge to the foreign policy aspect of India. Now we must have discussed in the past that the importance of India springs up from the fact that it is geostrategically and geopolitically very important. Look at the size of the Indian market, the population, all these make India very significant when we are talking about dynamism in the world politics. So having said about India, we would then divert our focus to Latin America. Now, why has suddenly Latin America become important? Latin America and India geographically very far, but suddenly they start exchanging relations, exchanging emissaries, and then we have a trade between the two countries. So what is it? What made suddenly Latin America so important? So we would like to look into all this. So if we look at the history of Latin America, They were fully buried in their colonial legacy for almost 180 years, and most of them started getting independent in the 1810s, and by 1825 most of them were independent countries. Now, Latin America and Caribbean countries, they are only known for their political instability. Whenever we think about Latin America, we will say, oh, these are the countries which are politically unstable. There are a number of military takeovers. Every country has seen military dictatorship and coups at some point of time. Then we have the caudillismo, the caudillos, which are very important, drug trafficking issues in all the North Latin American countries, the economic crisis, the restructuring program that they had to undergo. Economic instability is a major feature of most of the Latin American countries, and then the related chaos. But it would not suffice to say that these were the problems and these are still the problems. Thanks to the visionary leaders and inhabitants of the regions, now this Latin America has slowly evolved and learned to regain the strength of multiculturalism, the strength of multilateralism, the strength of a large population, a large market force, and Latin America suddenly becomes a force to reckon. Now, if we look at the Latin American relationship with India, now we are trying to fit in where in Latin America does India fit? How is Latin America being utilized by India and vice versa? How is Latin America now looking at India? So, let us start with India, Latin America. Were there any relationships or is it new? So, in the first 50 years of India's independence, the geographical distance was definitely a major obstacle for trade and tourism at the time. Even now, for tourism purposes, people rarely think about Latin America because of the high fares, and geographical distance was major. We did not know what items Latin America excelled in, and so trade was also negligible. But we should not forget that in the past, the Chilean poet Pablo Neruda and Bengali poet Rabindranath Tagore, they established cultural ties long before we developed political or economic ties. So, the history goes back, but it was limited exchange. Then also we have to look into why India and Latin America remained apart for a considerable period of time. Because India and Latin America, if we look at them, these are the nations which belong to different clubs. Now, India was a member of the British Commonwealth, it was a British colony, whereas Latin Americans were either Spanish or Portuguese colony. And India was a founder member of the non-aligned movement, a kind of a movement which was insignificant for Latin America. Latin America was not worried about the non-aligned movement. Now, so we see that they have totally different interests, they have totally different commitments, but what was the perception in India about Latin America? The Indians thought of Latin American countries as unstable and plagued by coups, earthquake and inflation. And the Latin American also had similar perceptions. They saw India only as a land which was full of poverty and there were internal civil conflicts. So, both of them were very cautious and wary about each other's image, and they would not give due regard to each other's strengths. And then we suddenly see that there is a U-turn, there is a slew in policies, and suddenly Latin America becomes important. Now, what made this change? What brought about this change? Now, as I would like to point out that Delhi was traditionally shunned by the Latin American diplomats as a third world backwater, and recently now Delhi has a new sheen. It is a shining capital for Latin America. The number of Latin American missions have increased from 12 in 2002 to 18 in 2009. Then a preferential trade agreement between India and Chile went into effect in 2007, and another between India and Mercosur followed in 2009. Now, we see that they are coming to agreements, they are engaging on economic fronts also. Now, in the 50 years of independence, we noticed that only 12 presidential visits took place from the Latin American countries to India. Now, and if you look at all this, in the decade between 2001 to 2011 alone, there were 10. That means only 2 people made an effort to come before 2000. Now, Chilean presidents Ricardo Lagos came in 2005 and Michelle Bachelet in 2009. 2001, the first Colombian president to visit India was Andres Pastrana. But to top it all, if we look at Brazil, Brazilian President Lula da Silva visited India 3 times during his tenure, and that goes on to account for the importance of Indo-Brazil relations. And this Brazil is one of my focus countries on which I am going to look at. It is important to note that India and Brazil are similar countries with similar kind of history, similar background, similar kind of environmental setup. So, a comparison becomes very easy. Now, if we look at the Indian view at the same time when the Brazilian presidents were coming to India and missions were being established, what was India doing in Latin America? So, if we look at it from the Indian perspective on how it was trying to make an effort, then we see that the Indian missions in the region doubled from 7 to 14 between 2002 and 9. There were increased trade figures, I am not giving the figures, but increased trade figures and movement of business and ministerial delegations. PM Manmohan Singh visited Brazil twice in 2006 and 2010. He also visited Cuba and Trinidad and Tobago, which has a huge Indian diaspora. And President Pratibha Patil also visited Brazil, Chile and Mexico in 2008. Now, what suddenly made Latin America so important? Then suddenly, now that it became important, then we had to take certain measures to strengthen the ties. And then the government of India started taking series of measures to improve bilateral and multilateral ties with the Latin American regions. So, we could capitalize on our strengths and they could capitalize on their strengths, and we could then compensate for each other's weaknesses by collaborating in trade and economic terms. Now, why the neglect? Why was it that Latin America was neglected for so long? Now, every time we talk about foreign policy or the internationalization of world politics, what we look at is that too much of unnecessary attention is being paid to China's role in the Americas. Now, if I say Americas, I mean Canada, North America, Central America and South America. So, much of the attention has been focused on China's role, and growing Indo-Latin American ties have been largely ignored by the press. So, the role of the press is also very important. It highlights China and underplays India. The change comes about in 2010 when the Indian Inter-American Development Bank, it issued a report entitled India, Latin America's Next Big Thing, and this made a U-turn. This made the policies change, and this is when when both the countries start making efforts to come closer to each other. Now, if we look at how they tried to get closer to each other, there were a lot of bilateral ties between the two countries. There were trade agreements, there were cultural exchanges, there were economic exchanges, but the most important was a move towards multilateralism. It was realized that bilateral ties were not enough. So, we needed more of multilateralism, and India is a practitioner of multilateral politics or multipolarity. So, it was decided that only bilateral relations would not suffice, we should move beyond, and so they started grouping on multilateral forum. So, the first is the IBSA Dialogue Forum. So, this India, Brazil and South Africa forum, it plays an increasingly important role in the foreign policies of the three partner countries, India, Brazil and South Africa. Now, the IBSA has a major role. It is instrumental for promoting closer coordination on a lot of global issues, because as a group they can be more assertive, they can say their issues or present their issues in a more articulated manner, and because it has diverse countries from diverse continents, then it becomes a representative of the interest of people across continents. So, they started negotiating on global issues between three large multicultural and multiracial democracies. One thing was common, but that all of them were multicultural and multiracial democracies, but spread across three continents, as I said, of Asia, South America and Africa. Now, this kind of an interaction, it contributed to enhancing trilateral India, Brazil, South Africa cooperation in sectoral areas. We identified certain areas, and these areas were the thrust areas of IBSA. Now, this is one, IBSA is one important aspect of Indo-Brazil relations. I told you my focus area would be Brazil, because Brazil is a large partner of India. Now, if we look at the Indian-Brazil relationship, at the center of Indo-Latin American countries' relation is the Brazil-India link, very important, and that's how IBSA comes into existence. We have another forum then, BRICS. It was a term coined by Goldman Sachs to refer to the emerging powers of Brazil, Russia, India and China. And despite differing interests on some key issues like agriculture, Brazil and India have taken together the role of leading the new South, because see, the countries have at a different levels of development, Brazil, Russia, India and China. Russia is struggling with its internal problems, China thinks it is a big economy, and Brazil or India are the only two countries who are on the level playing field. So, in the post new Cold War era, these are the two countries with similar interests and similar kind of power behind them. They assume the role of the new South. New South means the emerging economies who can now rightly be classified as middle powers or emergent powers. Apart from this, the initiatives like IBSA, Dialogue Forum, there were other things which were also happening. There was the G20 plus bloc of developing countries, which was formed at the initiative of Manmohan Singh and Lula, and India and Brazil were the important steering partners of this forum G20, and this was an important bloc which was representing the interest of these developing countries. And as I said earlier, Manmohan Singh and Lula were the key players in terms of formation and in terms of expansion of the role of G20. Now, if we look at President Lula, he has a lot of credit goes to President Lula when we talk about enhancing Indo-Brazil relationship, because President Lula's nimble foreign policy and diplomatic initiatives help counter the perception that there are only two bricks in the wall, China and India, because of their large population, and Lula tried to defy this notion that there are only two important countries in BRICS, and Brazil is a force to reckon. And Lula throughout he tried to emphasize that Brazil has complementarity with India. We have common global aspirations, we have common agenda on many of the multilateral issues, we fight similarly on the economic front, on the environmental front. If we look at the environmental issues from the Earth Summit, Rio Earth Summit, we have seen that Brazil and Europe have taken similar stands on most of the environmental fora, because they have similar kind of interest, environmental assets to defend. And that is when we realize that they are complementary countries. Now, Brazil has what India lacks. It has a large and fertile landmass, the largest of the rainforest called the lungs of the earth, and abundant water supply, Amazon River. And this makes it very important, because this kind of water, this kind of landmass and the climate can increase the production of food multifold, and food is something which India will always be needing, be it soya bean or legume or sugar. So, the idea is, the point that I am trying to drive is that because Brazil is an agricultural country, it will have high agricultural productivity thanks to the water supply, climate and the large amount of land mass, and India is a country with a large population, with a large food requirement. So, time and again it will be needing Brazil's help in terms of food assistance. So, now we discussed that there are three pillars. One is IBSA, the second is BRIC. These are multilateral institutions, and there is the one-man show of Lula, which becomes very important in bringing India and Brazil together. Now, if we look at the role of IBSA and BRIC and we try to compare them, there are a couple of comparisons which emerge. Now, indeed, since its inception, IBSA has focused on more aspects than BRICS. So, in that terms, we can say that IBSA has a wider ambit, it has a wider domain as compared to BRICS. Now, BRICS pulls more weight on political and economic issues, as two of the members, Russia and China, they are part of the P5 or the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council. So, it has more weight, it is a weighty organization. But on the economic side, then again you see that one is in G8, the other has become the world's second largest economy. So, if we look at it comprehensively, then we see that BRICS is more important, but IBSA cannot be ignored, because it brings more focus and had expended much more energy on tackling the social aspects of globalization, which is very important. While we were globalizing, we took into account economic aspects, the political aspects, and totally ignoring the social aspects. So, the IBSA contributes in a big way in cushioning the social fallouts or the social drawbacks of globalization. So much so, we were talking so much about the Indo-Brazil relationship that it emerged that yes, it has a lot of future, there are a lot of areas in which we can collaborate, and as I told you, environment is one. Climate change issues, most of the time we see that Brazil and India are negotiating or talking or arguing along the same lines. If there is a signing of an agreement or a treaty, they most of the time, more often than not, they take the same stand, because maybe it is because of the mindset of the leaders, the kind of public opinion that is generated within both the countries, and public opinion has a major role to play. So, we see that these two countries are more like-minded in terms of thinking on environmental issues, on economic issues, social aspects and political aspects. Also because Brazil has a large indigenous population and so has India. So, the problems with indigenous issues are same in both the countries. So, we look at the cultural background of both the countries, lot of similarities between the two. And so much was being said by between India and Brazil, and this was a smaller domain that I was taking. But if we look at the larger picture, then so much was being said that India and Latin America, where should they go, what is the future of such a relationship, and we realize that there is a lot of optimism and that both countries can engage at much higher levels, at much different levels, and this would give a new thinking to the dynamism in international politics. And I would like to quote Jahangir Aziz, which is a chief Indian economist and one of the Asia's bigger famous economist at JP Morgan, and he said that India and Latin America have strong similarities in terms of their economic and political history in the post-World War period. So, even he is pointing out to the similarities in terms of economic and political background. He goes on to say that both went through strong socialistic regimes before economic crisis forced them to liberalize. So, both structural reforms, economic restructuring in Brazil and post 1991 economic liberalization in India. So, he sees a kind of similarity in both the issues, because we were running a planned economy, we were a welfare country. So, Aziz sees India also as a socialistic country. Then, but while all this was the similarities that he is pointing out, he also says why the limitation, why was it that Latin America and India were cautious or could not engage at the level that was expected. And then he points out that geographical distance is a major factor. However, economic necessity can overcome such barriers. He says in present day conditions, geography is past or history, and what is important is economic necessity. If economics economic necessities compel a country to engage with some country which is very far away, they will not hesitate. And this is what he says, that this geographical barrier is going to be overcome. Rise in trade between China and Latin America, he quotes as an example. See the same distance, or maybe it's further. So China and Latin America are engaging with each other on economic terms. So we cannot say that geography is a barrier. Now India-Latin America trade, according to Aziz, will emerge as an important growth driver. Free trade agreements and other such agreements will follow, and these agreements will help to expand the pace of trade integration. So we will not be isolated countries far removed from each other, but because of these engagements of trade, we will definitely come together. Now larger economies of Latin America such as Brazil and Chile, Argentina, Peru, all these countries, they are the natural trading partners of India, because we are driven by the size of these countries. And we have a lot of commodities which we can bring from them, and there are commodities which we can give to them. So if we look at what the larger countries of Latin America are natural partners, but so much so that we started ignoring the smaller countries. But we cannot ignore the smaller countries, because look at Costa Rica, the kind of Amazon rainforest and the timber products that it has, you cannot ignore it. Cuba, for example, because of its sugar and cigar, we couldn't ignore it. And the pharmaceuticals in Cuba is amazing. It is comparable to any other country in the world. So then we had to also concentrate on the smaller Latin American countries. Like there are certain Latin American countries, smaller ones, which are very, very advanced in agricultural products and technology, software engineering, pharmaceuticals and aviation equipments. So Aziz points out that it is not only the bigger Latin American countries that India has to engage with, but the smaller countries are equally important. So when we look at Latin America, it is not a problem, because we are engaging, or we are having ties with countries with similar levels of development. So at least engaging or negotiating is not a major problem, because A, that we have similar kind of background, we have similar kind of political mindset, and B, that there are similar levels of development. So we don't have a mistrust about the other country, that country is using me as a market, or that country is going to economically exploit me. That is not the consideration. So the hope is that these two countries will definitely have an edge in terms of engagement. Now moving to Europe, if we move to Europe from Latin America, we see that Europe has always been very important, not only for India, for any country in the world. Europe is important. Why? Because they have been the pioneers of nation building. The entire concept of nation states, of imperialism, of colonialism, all these concepts of political science have emerged in Europe. The Treaty of Westphalia, the removal of the dominance of the church and giving importance to states, all this happens only in Europe. Most of the political ideologies have emerged in Europe. You talk about liberalism, we talk about socialism, Marxism, communism, all important ideologies have emerged in Europe. So much so that political science looks very Western European in its outlook. It has been the seat of imperialism and neocolonialism. All the major colonizing powers in the world were always European. And to top it all, the most important desettling, maybe the balancing factor or offsetting factor, is the presence of a huge Indian diaspora in Europe. And this has made all the difference, because when you have a large Indian population and which are contributing to your economy, then the policies that these countries, these respective countries are making vis-a-vis India, it becomes very important. So India cannot be ignored. Now, individual countries, of course, France and Germany were not, they were having trading relations. Germany is the biggest trading partner of India, but we were a little wary about having relations with France and Germany, but India was very naturally trying to align with UK because of so many factors, and I will come to that. Now, if we look at India, Europe, if we look at the comparison between the two, and if I say Europe, I am taking up the case of European Union, and this is the President of European Union who I am borrowing his dialogue. He said that India has 28 federal states, and if we include, that is, if in European Union includes Croatia, there are 28 member states in European Union. So both have equal number of components or constituent units, 28 federal states, whereas 28 member states in European Union. The word has been used cautiously, federal state, because India is a federation, and 28 member states in European Union, some of them are federal countries, some of them are not. So we have to use this term very cautiously. Now, India has 23 official language, and Europe, if we include English, also has 23 official language. Now, both Europe and India are marked by complexity and diversity. They both are multicultural, multilinguistic, multi-ethnic societies. And towards the end, I will just like to say that relations have intensified and diversified. That is, in India and Europe, they have come closer, and they have also diversified into different areas and not concentrating on their traditional areas. Now, why is that Europe is important for India in terms of dynamism? If we say Europe, then why is Europe important? Because one is that it is linked to the colonial legacy of India, and then it is, the ties are colored by the outlook of the Western educated leaders. Most of our leaders, they either went to Europe or to Germany or to France or to Russia to get their education. So the country which they went to colored their outlook. So a person like Gandhi or Nehru would have a different outlook because they were educated in Britain, and some people who were educated elsewhere would have a different outlook. So the outlook of the leaders was colored by the European concepts. Then Britain has a special place, of course, due to the Indian diaspora, and being because of the fact that it was our colonial master for a very long time. If we look at European Union, then it is a lesson in multilateralism, and India is giving due consideration to multilateral relations. And if we look at India and Europe, they look like very natural partners because we have shared beliefs and values in some of the aspects like democracy, pluralism, human rights, independent media, and the rule of law. Now, how do the Europeans view India? What is the perception of Europe in India? Most of the Europeans, they see India as a rising global power, one of the world's largest economy, largest democracy with 1.2 billion people. They also see it as an economic giant in the making, not only in terms of production, but also in terms of the market that it has. The general feeling towards Indian among Europeans is of respect and admiration. It's not they despise us or hate us. No, it is they respect and admire. Respect for history and culture of India, and definitely awe and admiration for recent accomplishments. They cannot underwrite or dismiss our achievements in the recent years, and more so because the people in Europe, they are a little surprised about how modernization with such huge population and such level of poverty is achieved, and at a very high pace. So this is the kind of perception that India has in Europe. It's a mixed feeling, sometimes awe and admiration, and sometimes they are surprised how India can do it in such a small time. Now, if we look at some of the aspects in which India and Europe negotiate, then if we look at the trade, despite the economic turmoil which is going on throughout the globe, bilateral trade in goods have grown by 20% between 2010 and 2011. If I say bilateral, I mean the countries of the European Union. There is a free trade agreement which is being negotiated, and this would be the world's largest ever, encompassing 1.8 billion people. Now, the only problem is that we are the European markets are trying to be protectionist, and it is advisable, or it would be good if we could resist protectionism. Even India is trying to be protective towards its own products and markets. So, at this time both the partners have to resist protectionism in this phase of the crisis, because a trade agreement between India and Europe will send a strong signal to the rest of the world that the answer to economic uncertainties do not come from increased protection. We have to enhance trade between the two countries, and this becomes very important. If we look at the second aspect of engagement between India and Europe, it is security. Now, Europe fully shares India's quest for a stable and secure regional environment. So, fair enough, if every country would like a stable and secure regional environment, and we give it to India, because of India has a geopolitical and geostrategic importance. Now, Europe and India both share a common interest in defeating global terror and extremism. They share the same kind of concerns about terrorism. Both the countries, they want to secure their trade lines from the attack by pirates, and they also want to prevent the attack on our information technology infrastructures. And we also want to secure the challenge to our non-proliferation treaties. So, EU is fully equipped to tackle these security challenges because it is a developed country, but this is where India has to have an advantage. Now, India will try to have partnership with European Union so that it can borrow or learn about security issues from the European Union. So, this is very important. The security aspects, there is a lot of learning to be done. There is a lot of lessons to be learned from the way the European Unions handle their security aspects. Now, if we talk about the global cooperation, the global negotiations, and how these two countries are going to cooperate, that is multilateralism. How is multilateralism being tackled by the two partners? Now, climate change, for example, at last year's Durban climate meeting, the cooperation between India and the EU, they started from totally different positions, and it seemed that they were diverging, and they would not, like two ends of a river, they would never meet. But unexpectedly the outcome was that they created a dynamic and positive environment, and they wanted to collaborate. So, this became very important, and all these, the climate change outcome was totally different. Now, World Trade Organization, where India and Europe, they together can show the way, how these kind of multilateral negotiations on economic conditions can benefit everybody. Coming down to Britain, if we look at Britain, we see that Britain is the most important factor in the European continent with which India wants to engage. And the reason for India's lopsided engagement, I must say, lopsided engagement with Britain is the ties of colonialism, and India is part of the Commonwealth. So, and see, if we look at the kind of government we have, the parliamentary democracy that we have, the kind of territorial division that was created, all the kind of constitution making that we did, all these were motivated or driven by the British colonial rule over India. So, to come out of the shackles of this was very difficult, and so we maintained a kind of a tie with Britain, which was very important. Then, if we look at the trade volume, it has UK has the largest trade volume in India. Role of the Indian diaspora is very important, because the Indian community is the largest outside community in UK. So, any policy which is being made in UK has to take into consideration the Indian diaspora, be it immigrant policies, be it citizenship issues, be it trade issues, any issue, and the British politicians can't ignore the Indian diaspora. Then there are a lot of immigration issues involved, things like work permit, how citizenship is to be granted, and all this are very driven towards the Indian community, and Indian community at large cannot be ignored. Now, coming to Britain, there have been a lot of interactions between Britain. There have been lot of exchanges between Britain. We have speaker to speaker level of interaction. The Prime Minister has been coming. So, it is not that it was very easy. It was not very easy for the two countries to collaborate, because whenever India tried to take a step forward, the colonial background would come into its mindset, and this would then stall the entire process. But having overcome all this in the years that have gone by, the Indian politicians also decide that yes, we must collaborate, because things are looking up economically. We have to engage with them, because there are certain aspects which we need to borrow, and this is how, when I am saying that it is the largest volume of trade is between India and UK, and that is how it is rationalized or explained. Now, challenges for India are to ensure that Europe opens its market to Indian goods. That is a problem, because whatever we look at WTO, whenever we look at any preferential trade agreement, the idea or the point is to block, if not block, then restrict the volume of trade that is being conducted. That is, there will be some clause which will be put on the goods that are being exported to other countries from India, and that restricts the market. So, the market in Europe needs to be opened up for Indian goods, and how to do that? That is a challenge for India. In contrast, now India is trying to open to have access to the market of Europe. At the same time, Europe is also wanting India to open up for its good, and without any condition. This is very difficult, because if it is a give and take relationship, it is good, but if it's a one-sided relationship, when Europeans want more access to the Indian market, this is a problem issue, and this becomes a challenge for India. Then the quality of Indian goods are questioned. At times, just to restrict, they will ask that what are the environmental norms that you have followed? How far did you comply with the environmental rules and regulations? Were there any violations of labor laws? For example, we have seen the carpet industry in India, how it suffered, the Mirzapur carpet, and how clamping the child labor, the utilization of child labor in the manufacture of Mirzapur carpet. Then US tried to restrict the export of Indian carpets from Mirzapur. So, this is how the quality of Indian goods are questioned. Then what are the ethical principles that you have utilized in manufacturing those goods are also questioned. Then there are hurdles of work permit, 100 questions asked, 100 interviews conducted before you can get a work permit. Whereas in a globalization economy, the condition was that there should be free movement of labor across the world. And now by having a kind of a strict work permit, then you are trying to restrict the market. Now, another challenge for India is that India more often than not is only focusing on the larger EU states, France, Germany, Spain, then UK, but the smaller ones are ignored. We do not look at Serbia, we do not look at Croatia or Denmark. So, we have to comprehensively look at entire Europe. Even the smaller nations have something to offer. So, this is another challenge for India. Now, what is the way forward? How can India come out of the problems that we are facing in the global politics or European problems? What is the way out for the Indian dynamism? How we say that the world is dynamic, but even India is dynamic, and what is the way out or way forward for Indian dynamism? So, I would just like to end the presentation by listing these ways out. First is expanded role in emerging global political and economic order. India is an emerging country, it is an emergent economy, it is a middle power now, and so what role do we envisage for India in this new order, world order? Now, in India, the Indian leaders, the Indian economic giants, they must promote multilateralism and multipolarity in international relations, because unipolarity will not do, because one pole of power means excessive concentration of power, and that would take away the entire weight of other small middle economies, and India would then definitely lose out. So, that is why time and again India has been promoting multilateralism and multipolarity in international relations. That is very important. And then India has been trying to catch on. See, we do not have an advantage, we are not a developed country, we do not have very important advantages in terms of technology, but what we can improve upon is develop indigenous technologies, and these indigenous technologies, which are very unique and new to India, will enhance our competitive edge. So, this is how India should try and build, because see, other technologies which are cliched have come from India, because they have come from other countries, India has borrowed from other countries, and they are the same in one country and the other country. But what gives us advantage is the indigenous technologies that we are using, and we cannot underwrite or underestimate these indigenous technology. The quality of human resources is also an advantage. So, India should try to capitalize on the quality of human resources. You look at the migration of Indian population, and you will see that it is not only the laborers who are leaving the country, there is a brain drain of the technical brains also, the doctors in UK for example, all the technocrats, engineers to United States, all the important positions in United States or Europe are very often manned by the Indian scientists or Indian technicians who have been educated in India. So, the world cannot ignore the human resource advantage of India. And the last way forward is that India must utilize its geopolitical and geostrategic advantage. The very fact, the positioning of India is so important in international relations that India cannot be ignored for geopolitical reasons, and that is one area of dynamism which India can show to gain advantage vis-a-vis Europe or vis-a-vis Latin America. And with this, I come to the end of this discussion, and the only thing, the outcome of the entire discussion was that India has emerged, it is an emergent political power, it is an emergent economic power, and due weightage has to be given to it vis-a-vis any other part of the world. So, Europe may have been important in the past, but India has emerged, it is important. So, if we look at the dynamics or shift in equilibrium of European politics or economics or social order, then India has to be taken into consideration. Latin America and India, both of them are emerging. So, that the problem of suppression or oppression is not there as much as it is with Europe. So, the dynamism of India is more often challenged in Europe, and so India, but the fact is that India cannot be ignored, and reasons we have seen. So, in the end I would say that India is an emergent economic and political power. Thank you.
So, given the economic slowdown in Europe and the many, even euro is falling down, so how do you see the economic aspect of India and the foreign policy? How in coming days it will alter or will see a shift in the foreign policy?
See, the first impression of Europe was of euphoria, that Europe is a first world. It cannot crash, it is economically much superior. Now, with the crash of Eurozone, some countries of the Eurozone. Now that euphoria has died down, and India now thinks that is why I was saying that India is now an emergent power, because India thinks that all this economic disorder, but India could still afford to have a cushion, or it did not get that affected. So that has shifted the foreign policy outlook of the Indian politicians. Like if they went on to negotiate, for example, let's talk about the civil nuclear deal only. So they would be meek when they were negotiating, and now with this crisis, economic crisis, they are more assertive. So this is the assertiveness is the change in the foreign policy making.
Okay. And recently, the new President of India, Mr. Pranab Mukherjee, when he was taking oath, he said that trickle-down theory has failed. Now we need to look out another way for the welfare of people, or another to give a kind of momentum to the economy. So this kind of talk at the level of decision maker, we can say, how this economically shift in the focus, we can say, because the policy entire cannot be saying only the focus will change, will have will force the other European countries or the other big power, superpower like America to think over the economic cooperation with India.
What my perception is that this kind of a statement is only exposing your weakness, because trickle down theory has been in place for so long, and suddenly you cannot take a U-turn. And if you say this kind of a thing, then America or Europe will only aim at the top level, because they know that it is not a worry. Social policies, labor laws, and giving them good conditions, all these are not problems, because we are rethinking in terms of policy. So let's see how it unfolds, but this kind of a statement is it's very early to make.
Okay, so the things will move. It is matter to see in the coming years. So well, friends, so with this word we conclude the lecture. I thank all of you for watching the lecture, and on behalf I thank Dr. Aparajita Kashyap for giving such an insightful lecture on this very topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.